there are some features in FiLMiC Pro you might not know about, but which can make a big difference to the look of your video or just cause you some major problems. So here's 4 features to check over before you start that important shoot. Compared to other camera apps for shooting video using your smartphone, FiLMiC Pro is one which has a lot of features, which is great, but they can also be sometimes a little bit overwhelming. Now, going through all the menus and scrolling through a host of toggle switches, it's easy to miss some important features. Personally, I tend to focus on the core features, such as exposure and focus, but it's really worth looking at some of the lesser known features as they can make a big difference too. In addition, sometimes things get switched on or off, or turned down, and then we're confused about why FiLMiC seems not to be working properly. So let's go through a few of them and find out what they do and whether you should use them or not. When shooting with Apple or Android phones, both will add digital sharpening to your video. However, digital sharpening is not something we would normally apply if we were trying to achieve the film look. And if we need it, we can always apply it later. Digital sharpening is a filter which works to overcome the limitations of a camera's sensor. Basically, the filter looks for edges in the image and attempts to make them more clearly defined. Thing is, film tends to return softer images than digital sensors. Therefore, if we want to mimic the look of film, it would be handy to be able to turn off digital sharpening. Creating a softer image isn't just a digital problem. Decades ago, cinematographers even complained that modern film was too sharp. Some even boasted of adding layers of filters to create a softer image. So why do smartphone makers add digital sharpening then? Well, it makes sense when we see manufacturers marketing their devices on the increasing ability to capture image detail. Soft images don't really sell devices with high-resolution screens like 4K and 8K TVs. Plus, if you're viewing videos or photos on a smartphone, then having crisper images makes sense too. They're simply easier to look at on a small screen. Unfortunately, currently, Apple has not allowed third-party apps access, so only Android users can turn off edge sharpening. Now, this is how to turn off edge sharpening in FiLMiC Pro. Open Settings. Click Device icon. Scroll to the bottom setting, Edge Enhancement. Tap left to disable. By default, the setting is set to Fast Edge Enhancement. You can also tap right to switch on Quality Edge Enhancement. However, FiLMiC Pro say they can't really see any difference between the quality and the normal fast edge enhancement. So if you want to keep your videos with extra edge sharpness, then keep it on. I recommend you experiment with both settings as different devices produce different results. But if you want that smoother, softer film look, then make sure it's in the off position. HDR stands for High Dynamic Range, and this term is used across a variety of features for TV and video devices, including smartphones. This format originated with stills photography. Photos captured at different exposure levels are merged into one, and this helps improve the dynamic range of your photos by taking the best exposed parts from different photos to create one complete photo. Now, different devices come with different types of HDR. For example, the latest Samsung devices carry HDR 10+. Meanwhile, Apple says the iPhone 11 Pro has extended dynamic range for video at 30 frames per second. And when HDR features are enabled, software analyzes an image using dynamic tone mapping and attempts to expose areas of the image differently. While this is great when using auto settings, when you try to use manual settings via FiLMiC Pro and other apps, there can be conflicts. This is because a manual camera app is trying to stop the camera setting things automatically, but HDR and other AI features are trying to adjust the image dynamically, sometimes frame by frame. Therefore, FiLMiC Pro and the inbuilt camera software sometimes conflict, and then weird things start to happen. I noticed this when I was shooting the video on how to use focus in FiLMiC Pro. While performing performing a test focus pull, I suddenly noticed one part of the image changing tone in the middle of the shot. Another time, the exposure control stopped working altogether. As I moved the exposure wheel, all that happened was extra noise was created, and the brightness remained the same. You can see here, when I have HDR enabled, as I move the exposure slider, I get this flickering, like FiLMiC Pro is pushing it one way and the HDR is pushing it another way. Now, Soderbergh has said when shooting High Flying Bird with an iPhone 8 Plus, the AI was overriding FiLMiC Pro and causing issues which needed hours of post-production work to fix. Soderbergh said, if somebody walks past a window or you pan through a light, the sensor responds even though it's supposed to be frozen. What makes it even worse is it's not the entire frame that responds, it's pieces of the frame. He even joked he would send Apple the bill for all the work they needed to do to fix it. So for that reason, you might want to switch off HDR. Again, I don't think this is possible with iPhones. I did actually ask FiLMiC Pro about this, and I just wanted to know if this is something that is ongoing or if it's going to get fixed in the future or what's going on with it, but they haven't actually responded yet. However, I did actually talk to someone from BeastGrip because they recently announced their camera app will finally be launched next month, which is quite exciting news. Be great to have another manual controls option camera app for our smartphones. With BeastGrip, you will imagine that they will probably be iPhone only, I'm guessing. So I asked about the iPhone AI issue. Their reply was that some older models have problems with skin tones under specific conditions, but in newer iPhones they fixed it. Well, I'm not really sure that answers the question, but as I don't have an iPhone, I can't test it. So iPhone users, do you have experiences with FiLMiC Pro and other apps conflicting with HDR or other software? Let us know. Just drop something in the comments there. Be interesting to find that out. Well, if our device has the option, should we have HDR on or off? It seems obvious that when using FiLMiC Pro for manual control, we don't want other software trying to override it with dynamic tone mapping. Then again, why do FiLMiC even give us the option to turn it on? My guess is that, again, each device is different, so I recommend you try it out on your device and see what happens if you have HDR on, and try to adjust exposure manually. But if you have an important shoot and you haven't had time to test your device with HDR on thoroughly, then I really recommend you make sure HDR is actually disabled if you can, because any conflict with FiLMiC can really ruin a shot. So how to turn off HDR? Open Settings, click the resolution icon, scroll to the bottom HDR on-off switch. Now tap the switch icon to disable HDR. Noisy video is often a problem with current smartphones with their small sensors. Noise happens when the digital signal providing the image information needs to be boosted, usually if there's not enough light in the scene. But smartphones also have inbuilt noise reduction software to help you out. The question is, should we have noise reduction switched on or off? Well, it depends on the situation and on the device. We can see there are 3 settings for noise reduction in FiLMiC Pro: disabled, fast, or high quality. Now, as with many features in FiLMiC Pro, noise reduction uses processing power, and our smartphones, indeed any digital cameras, have a limited amount. So, if you want to film in 4K at the extreme bitrate quality using a log setting and so on and on, each one of these requires more of your phone's processor. At some point, your device's processor will get stretched by too many demands. Your phone might overheat, and FiLMiC Pro becomes less stable. Crashes happen and bugs start appearing that weren't there before. So if you're using settings which are really stretching your camera's capabilities, you might want to turn off everything else you don't necessarily need. And one of those things might be noise reduction. For example, if you're shooting with plenty of light, then you might not need to reduce noise. Or you can simply keep the setting at fast, which is not as demanding but still removes a lot of the noise. Another thing to bear in mind is that noise reduction alters the look of the video, removing some fine detail. Therefore, if you find that you have enough light, so your ISO is at the lowest setting, there may be no noise anyway, in which case just have the noise reduction feature disabled. The There is another feature which we might not even know exists until one day we find FiLMiC no longer records audio. If you find the level meters in the app are at 0 when they should be registering an audio level, and your video is for some mysterious reason silent, then it could be that your audio is actually set to 0. And the thing is, there's an audio level slider which you might not even have noticed. The slider is actually located right at the bottom in the middle below the time display. Well, you can see this line is small. It's like a small white vertical line, and it's not too easy to notice it. You can easily just miss that and not even know it's there. So if one day you find that you for some reason are not recording any audio, if the slider is all the way to the left, your audio volume will be at 0. By default, I believe the slider is on the opposite side. In other words, all the way to the right at full gain. Of course, you can adjust the level to somewhere between those 2 points if you need to. Otherwise, just leave it at maximum. Okay, that's it for this video. I hope you found it useful. You know what to do. Like button, subscribe button. You know, there's that bell icon as well. Just, if you're feeling like giving me a nice surprise today. Anyway, you know what to do. So if you want some extra bonus content, keep watching. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next video. So yeah, bonus content. You might have noticed in some of the shots that they looked a little bit different to the kind of shots I usually get with my Samsung S9, and that's because I've been using this Beast Grip 3x telephoto. What happened was I mounted it using this. It's a 37mm screw-on thing, so that works with this simple clip. I originally actually tried it with the Beast Grip grip, like the cage that looks like this, but it's an older one, and because of the way the new Beast Grip lenses work, it has this little bobble sort of bayonet mount there. That didn't work with the older Beast Grip Pro grip, and so I tried this clip, but you can see this is quite a heavy lens, not massively heavy. I mean, it's still small compared to a lens you might put on your DSLR. I tried it on this, and it wasn't quite strong enough to hold it in place. So I could get it because you really have to position it very perfectly in front of the lens to get it looking good. And so I could do that with this, but then it would just a tiny movement and it would start to shift, and then you start to get all the sort of blurring and distortion, especially around the edges, and shadowing and everything else. So this is a Zekti, and it's sort of basically a copy of Beast Grip. Unfortunately, they don't make them anymore. Now, I'm actually using the FiLMiC Pro remote here. So I'm monitoring myself here, and I seem to be out of focus. Can I get myself into focus? Oh, that looks better. So I've got this Zekti that I bought a couple of years ago, and it was like a very cheap version, alternative to using the Beast Grip cage. And so I snapped that up. I think it was ridiculously cheap, like £17 or something. I've used this with my Moondog Labs lens as well, and I've noticed that it really works well because it's very snug to the lens. You can see this part here where you mount the lens. It's very close to the lens of the S9, and so it's perfect, and that just fits very snugly and perfectly. And looks rather good. It's not the cheapest lens, certainly. I wanted to try it because I think that a lot of the telephoto lenses like the Moment 58 and all the other of that kind of 2x telephoto range, they are not they don't really give you what I would call a proper like telephoto look. Smartphones normally have wide angle lenses, and so like a Moment 58 will just make it a bit less wide and add a tiny bit of shallow depth of field. That's a silly way to say that, isn't it? It's it will add a slightly shallower depth of field. So some of the shots that I did in this video, you may have noticed, were shot using this lens. And because it's 3x, you do get a definite kind of shallower depth of field, and it really does properly in like a telephoto lens. It's not like a super long lens that you're going to get if you wanted to do that with your smartphone. You could use a depth of field adapter, like Ulanzi and B-Script both do those, and then you can just add any kind of lens, DSLR lens. But I don't really want to go that far just yet, because this is like, I think this is a good compromise. It really does give you some shallower depth of field, but at the same time it's not a huge, like it's not out here, you know. It is quite a heavy lens, but I'm quite happy with it. But I'm going to do a proper video, you know, going through this and seeing what I can do with it. So you can have a look at that. But yeah, that's it. That's the end of bonus content, chaps. And also, I was going to say that I have ordered some interesting new things. Something that is used by professional cinematographers very often. And once you see it being used, you're like, that's how they do that. And it's very rarely talked about by smartphone filmmakers, something that we don't really look at, and yet it is quite possible to achieve using these things that I bought. So watch out, subscribe now, and so you don't miss it, because I'm going to be reviewing those in the next, in the coming weeks.